Hello and welcome. You're watching World Panorama, your favorite weekly show on all the big international stories that made headlines this week. I'm Aishwarya with you. First, a look at the top global news in precise. Islamic State names Abu Ibrahim al-Hashemi as its new leader. As US Special Forces attack Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's compound in Syria, Islamic State leader fled into a tunnel and killed himself with a suicide vest. US House of Representatives passes resolution to formally proceed with impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump. White House condemns vote. Trump calls it greatest witch hunt in American history. UK set to go to polls on 12th of December. After MPs approve snap poll, Prime Minister Johnson hopes for fresh mandate for his Brexit deal after parliamentary deadlock delays the UK's exit to 31st of January. Biggest day of mass anti-government demonstrations since fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Thousands throng central Baghdad, demand the downfall of political elite. Country's president says Prime Minister Mahdi ready to resign, but only if a replacement is found. And Alberto Fernandez wins decisive victory over the incumbent Macri in Argentina poll. Huge challenge ahead for Fernandez as the country attempts to dig itself out of a deep economic crisis. The Islamic State terrorist group has named its new leader as Abu Ibrahim al-Hashemi. This after the jihadist group confirmed the death of its leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The US Special Forces tracked down Baghdadi in northwest Syria at the weekend and attacked his compound. The Islamic State leader fled into a tunnel and killed himself with a suicide vest. The Iraqi had a $25 million bounty on his head and had been pursued by the US and its allies since the rise of Islamic State 5 years ago.
It was a tremendous weekend for our country. We killed ISIS leader al-Baghdadi. They've been looking for him for a long time.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the fugitive emir of Islamic State terrorist group, is dead. During a raid by the US Special Operations Forces at his hideout in northwest Syria on Saturday, Trump announced that Baghdadi died from detonating a suicide vest after fleeing into a tunnel while being chased by US military dogs. After the operation, Baghdadi's remains were transported to a secure facility to confirm his identity with forensic DNA testing and then were disposed.
His death marks a devastating blow for the remnants of ISIS, who are now deprived of their inspirational leader, following the destruction of their physical caliphate earlier this year.
The Pentagon released on Wednesday videos of the raid that led to Baghdadi's death. One video showed small black silhouettes of US soldiers approaching the walls of the compound. In another, bombs could be seen falling on the side. The Pentagon says no US personnel was killed in the raid. Photo of a hero dog wounded during the raid was released on Monday by Trump. Trump will welcome the military dog to the White House. Meanwhile, the residents in the Iraqi city of Mosul, once a stronghold of the Islamic State militants, spoke bitterly about Baghdadi's death.
If the victory was accompanied with the reconstruction of Mosul, we would be happy with the death of al-Baghdadi.
Baghdadi was the man who transformed a breakaway al-Qaeda group into a transnational terrorist franchise, Islamic State, a group that brutalized and killed civilians in more than a dozen countries and who threatened to rewrite the map of the Middle East by luring foreign recruits to wage jihad in Iraq and Syria. So what happens to the terror organization that he painstakingly assembled? Experts say that in many ways, the group is already evolving and that IS leadership ranks have proved resilient despite more than 5 years of war. And despite the loss of its territorial caliphate in Iraq and Syria, Islamic State has expanded its reach to include 14 separate affiliates in countries across Asia and Africa.
To kill the leader of ISIS is a very, very big step forward. So killing the leader was a very big symbolic victory. I think it was very, very big for America, big for the world, big for the region. But at the end of the day, we still have more work to do.
We have to know there is thousands of ISIS like Baghdadi, and they are ready to do what he did, and they already did, and they are not giving up. So we want to see more, and we wanted to see them in justice.
Experts say danger still looms from al-Baghdadi's call for followers to shift from larger attacks to more small actions outside Iraq and Syria. US military also says it expected Islamic State to stage some kind of revenge attack for the death of its leader. Even so, Baghdadi's death is being seen as a setback for Islamic State terror group and also a policy victory for Donald Trump, who continues to face criticism from political rivals and allies for his decision to pull troops out of northern Syria. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The US House of Representatives has taken a big step in the impeachment process of US President Donald Trump. It passed a resolution to formally proceed with the impeachment inquiry against Trump, voting by 232 to 196. In the vote, the House approved a measure establishing rules for public hearings and the release of transcripts from closed-door proceedings. The measure also outlined what rights Republican politicians and Trump himself would have to participate as the process moves ahead. Trump and the White House denounced the vote.
Tennessee, across the plains.
Donald Trump impeachment efforts passes first test in divided U.S. Congress. On Thursday, U.S. House of Representatives approved a resolution to formalize proceedings of impeachment inquiry into President Trump, setting the stage for what they have called the next phase of the investigation.
The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor, please say aye.
The resolution was passed by 232 votes to 196 by the Democratic-controlled House. No Republicans voted in favor of it and only 2 Democrats voted against it. It was not a vote on whether the president should be removed from office, rather the first test of support in Democrats-controlled House of Representatives for the impeachment process.
This resolution that we passed today lays the groundwork for open hearings in both the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee. The House and the American public must see all the evidence for themselves. The resolution is necessary to ensure that our constitutional order remains intact for future generations.
When my colleagues on the other side, I'll admit that they probably won't win another election. They have to use the impeachment process to try and take the president down. That shows how phony this process is.
The impeachment inquiry focuses on July 25th phone call in which Trump asked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate Democratic political rival Joe Biden, a former US Vice President, and his son Hunter, who had served as a director for Ukrainian energy company Burisma. The investigation examines whether Trump misused the power of his office for personal political gains, and if so, whether that rises to level of high crimes and misdemeanors that merit impeachment and removal from the office under the Constitution. President Trump condemned the House voting, calling it greatest witch hunt in American history. The White House said the vote was against House rules.
Transcript of the call that I had with the Ukrainian president is a perfect and totally appropriate document. And they're using that to try and impeach the President of the United States, who won one of the greatest elections in history.
While the U.S. Constitution doesn't require a vote for the House to launch an impeachment investigation, the move is largely seen as an attempt to nullify the claims that inquiry is not official without vote. This was the first time that House had taken a full chamber vote related to impeachment inquiry since House Speaker Nancy Pelosi initiated in late September. So far, the impeachment inquiry hearings have been held behind closed doors before 3 House panels. The resolution moves the inquiry to a new phase, which could eventually see articles of impeachment recommended against Trump. And if that happened, the House voted to pass the articles. A trial would be held in the Senate. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The UK will go to polls on 12th of December in what is expected to be one of the most momentous votes in a generation. The developments come after MPs backed Boris Johnson's call for an election following months of Brexit deadlock. The election campaign kicked off on 31st of October on what was to be the Brexit day. The fate of Brexit is now in balance as UK's political parties started a rare winter campaign to decide the country's direction for generations to come. An election has not been held in December in Britain since 1923.
British voters are set to decide the fate of Brexit. This after the British Parliament backed a bill calling for an election on December 12th to break the Brexit deadlock. In a rare parliamentary success for Prime Minister Boris Johnson after a string of defeats, his early election bill was approved 438 to 20 in the House of Commons on Tuesday. The House of Lords then passed the bill with no changes, and the bill then also received royal assent.
The ayes to the right, 438. The noes to the left, 20. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order.
Johnson, who had promised to deliver Brexit on October 31st, do or die, demanded a December 12th election after Parliament frustrated his attempts to ratify the last-minute divorce deal he struck with the EU earlier this month.
And there is only one way to get Brexit done in the face of this unrelenting parliamentary obstructionism, this endless, willful, fingers crossed, not me, gov refusal to deliver on the mandate of the people, and that is, Mr. Speaker, to refresh this Parliament and give the people a choice.
The passage of the election bill was welcomed by the UK's 2 largest parties, Conservative and Labour, and also the common man. In their final encounter in Parliament before the election, Conservative leader Johnson and opposition Labour's Jeremy Corbyn exchanged barbs over their political values. Just after midnight on Wednesday, 6th November, Parliament will be shut down or dissolved. The electoral authorities have set a deadline of the end of Tuesday, 26th November for people to register to vote.
I think it's probably a good thing to clear the air in Parliament and hopefully bring about a majority government. It's a bit difficult running with a minority government in power.
Meanwhile, EU concedes that there was still the risk of Britain's chaotic departure from the bloc without a divorce agreement.
Ladies and gentlemen, the risk of Brexit happening without a ratified deal still exists. It could happen at the end of January. It could also happen at the end of 2020.
The election comes after the EU extended the UK's exit deadline to 31st January 2020, although Brexit can happen earlier if a deal is agreed to by MPs. The first Christmas election in Britain since 1923 would be highly unpredictable. Brexit has variously fatigued and enraged swaths of voters while eroding traditional loyalties to the 2 major parties, Conservative and Labour. Some politicians feel an election so close to Christmas could also irritate voters. However, one thing is certain, that the polls in December is going to be one of the most momentous votes in a generation. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
In World Panorama, we'll take a very short break, and after the break, we'll tell you about anti-government demonstrations in Iraq that have flared up again. The country's president says Prime Minister Mahdi is ready to resign, but only if a replacement was found. All the details on the Iraqi unrest on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. Tens of thousands of Iraqis thronged central Baghdad on Friday, demanding the root and branch downfall of the political elite. It was said to be the biggest day of mass anti-government demonstrations since the fall of Saddam Hussein. Protests in which 250 people have died over the past 1 month have accelerated dramatically in recent days to reject the political parties in power since 2003. Earlier, the country's president announced that Prime Minister Mahdi would resign, but only if a replacement was found.
After weeks of anti-government protests in Iraq, Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi has agreed to resign. The country's president announced this on Thursday in a televised speech to the nation. However, he made it clear that it would happen only if a replacement was found.
Prime Minister Mahdi has agreed to submit his resignation if the blocs agree on an acceptable replacement in order to adhere to constitutional and legal frameworks that will avoid any constitutional vacuum.
The developments came after powerful Shia religious leader Muqtada al-Sadr, who leads the largest bloc in Iraq's parliament, supported protesters' call for an early election and called on other parties to back his push for a no-confidence vote in Abdul Mahdi. Iraq's political leaders are scrambling to produce a solution to mounting protests, which have gripped parts of Iraq for the past 1 month, calling for economic reforms. The government has tried to regain control with the use of lethal force, while also imposing curfews and internet blackouts. More than 200 protesters have been killed and thousands injured. Another wave of protests broke out in the capital Baghdad on Wednesday, made up of protesters from across the country's ethnic and sectarian divides. Demonstrations turned violent at nightfall, and protesters attempted to storm a bridge leading to the heavily fortified green zone that includes foreign embassies, the Iraqi parliament building and other government buildings.
We don't want the firing of 1 or 2 officials. We want the government to be uprooted totally. We are staying here until the government is totally uprooted.
On Thursday, the United Nations appealed for a national dialogue to ease the widespread anger.
We call on the authorities to launch investigations into the use of force and these continued killings and injuries that are taking place, and to really knuckle down to a meaningful dialogue to try and reduce the tension and bring some satisfaction to the situation. But above all, they have to ensure the protests are handled in line with international human rights law.
Abdul Mahdi came to power just a year ago as a compromise candidate between al-Sadr and main political rival Hadi al-Amiri, who heads a coalition of Iran-backed Shia militia leaders. Earlier this week, al-Sadr and al-Amiri agreed to work to remove Abdul Mahdi from office. The Prime Minister had previously offered a range of concessions, including a cabinet reshuffle and a package of reforms. The measures have failed to appease the protesters, however, who on Thursday took to the streets across Iraq for a 7th successive day. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And here is a look at some more international news stories in Global Buzz. The death toll from a train fire in Pakistan's East Punjab province has risen to 74. The incident happened due to explosions of 2 gas cylinders and a stove inside the running train on which passengers were preparing their breakfast. Initially, one of the compartments caught fire, but it later engulfed 2 other bogies because of the thrust of the wind at the moving train. The incident happened in Rahim Yar Khan district of Pakistan's East Punjab province when the train Tez Gam Express was on its way to the province's Rawalpindi city from Karachi. A fire destroyed all the main structures of Shuri Castle, a UNESCO World Heritage Site on Japan's southern island of Okinawa. Firefighters battled the flames for more than 10 hours, extinguishing them by Thursday afternoon. No injuries were reported. It is still unclear what might have triggered the fire. The wooden castle was built 500 years ago and served as a campus for Okinawa's largest public university until the 1970s and has been a popular tourist attraction since. North Korea conducted another test of its super large multiple rocket launchers successfully on Thursday. The test success was immediately reported and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un expressed his satisfaction and congratulated the scientists who had developed the weapon. The state news agency released a photograph of the multiple rocket launchers surrounded by yellow flames and smoke. Spain has offered to host the United Nations COP25 climate change summit in Madrid. This following Chile's withdrawal as a host amid raging street protests in the South American nation. Violent riots have left large parts of Santiago, the initial venue for the COP25 conference, shut down, with its vital metro transport system also suffering nearly $400 million in damage. The abrupt move to withdraw meant that the event's host caught participants off guard and without an alternative venue. A magnitude 6.5 earthquake rocked the southern Philippines that is still reeling from two strong tremors this month, killing at least 5 people on Thursday and causing previously damaged buildings and homes to collapse. The integrity of several buildings and homes had already been weakened by a 6.3 earthquake that struck on 16th of October and another 6.6 earthquake on 29th of October. President Rodrigo Duterte's office directed all the agencies and local government units to provide the necessary assistance and immediate relief to those affected. Argentina on Sunday elected Alberto Fernandez as its new president, winning a decisive victory over incumbent Mauricio Macri in the highly anticipated poll. The voters appear to have rejected austerity measures that Macri insisted were needed to revive Argentina's struggling economy. The results showed the hope of a reprieve from the country's crushing economic crisis. But just hours after the results, the central bank imposed significantly stricter controls on the purchase of US dollar, underlining the scale of economic challenge that new President Fernandez faces.
Raucous crowds at opposition candidate Alberto Fernandez's election headquarters to celebrate the result of the country's Sunday poll. Fernandez was elected president of Argentina in a vote dominated by economic concerns. Fernandez had 48.1% of the vote, beating conservative incumbent Mauricio Macri. The vote was held amid an economic crisis that has left a third of Argentina's population in poverty.
We are going to rebuild the egalitarian and supportive Argentina that we all dream of. And whoever our opponents are, in 4 years' time, may they be aware of what they have left us and help us rebuild the country from the ashes they have left behind.
Incumbent Macri, who was seeking to win a second term, conceded the defeat with 40.47% of the vote. Macri had won the presidency in 2015 on the promise of transforming the country and the economy and reducing poverty. He is credited with returning Argentina to international global markets following a break after the 2001 crisis. But he failed to deliver on the promises to jumpstart the economy of the recession-hit country. 4 years to his term, the peso has more than halved in value. Inflation is amongst the highest in the world and poverty has spiked to over 35%. Many Argentines have taken to the streets in the recent past, frustrated with cut subsidies that have led to rise in utilities and transportation costs.
Macri government did everything wrong. They had bad economic policies which impacted a lot of people who work, and they practically destroyed the middle class.
que la destruyó prácticamente.
Fernandez will officially take office in December for a 4-year term. With the economy in such doldrums, he has his task cut out. After the poll result, the central bank restricted dollar purchases to $200 from $10,000 a month until December. The move aimed at reducing dollar demand and stabilizing the Argentine peso.
Much of what Argentina needs right now is probably rooted in putting an end to hyperinflation, restoring growth, and in essence, trying to restore the quality of life to Argentina. And that's going to be a very, very difficult task.
Meanwhile, former President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner will now become Vice President in Fernandez's administration. She is said to have played a key role in Fernandez's election triumph. The result marks a shift leftward for South America, which has seen conservative governments elected in Brazil, Colombia and Chile in recent years. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And before we go, take a look at the residents of a zoo in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, being treated with special Halloween treats served with carved pumpkins filled with different food. Raccoons fought for a pumpkin filled with vegetables, nuts and raisins, while a gorilla, elephant and bears were served other vegetarian delicacies in carved pumpkins. So enjoy watching the Feast of Pumpkins. As I take your leave, I'll see you next week in another edition of World Panorama. Bye-bye.